160 confirmed kills, 255 claimed kills, over 2,000 American lives saved. These numbers made Chris Kyle a legend, but they also made him a target. With the largest bounty ever placed on an American soldier's head, everyone in Iraq wanted him dead. He survived assassins, bombs, firefights, and 4 tours in the most dangerous place on Earth. But the real war began when he came home. This is the story of America's deadliest sniper, a man who could hit a target from over a mile away, but couldn't hit the target of peace in his own mind. What you're about to discover will shatter everything you think you know about heroes, war, and the invisible wounds that kill more veterans than any enemy ever could. This isn't just the story of a soldier. This is the story of a man who sacrificed everything to serve his country during one of America's darkest periods. What Chris Kyle experienced is the most striking example of what modern warfare can do to a human soul. He was the nightmare of his enemies in Iraq, the most trusted name among his brothers in arms, and a father his family was proud of. But he was also a man carrying the invisible wounds of war, struggling to return home, and ultimately becoming a victim of those very wounds. Chris's story shows us the true meaning of heroism, the price of sacrifice, and how war changes not only those it's fought against, but those who fight it. This is the real story that Hollywood movies didn't show you. Because real heroes aren't perfect. They're human beings like us, just forced by extraordinary circumstances to do extraordinary things. So who was Chris Kyle? How did he become America's deadliest sniper? What did he experience in Iraq, and what did he face when he returned home? And most importantly, how did a hero meet such a tragic end? Here are all the answers to these questions. Christopher Scott Kyle was born on April 8, 1974, in Odessa, Texas. His father, Wayne, was a church deacon and teacher, while his mother, Debbie Lou, was a Sunday school teacher. Chris was a typical Texas boy, raised in cowboy culture, learning to ride horses and handle firearms at a very early age. The Kyle family instilled strong values in their children. Wayne Kyle would tell his sons that there are 3 types of people in life: sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. Sheep are harmless but defenseless. Wolves harm others, and sheepdogs protect the sheep from wolves. Chris was constantly told he needed to be a sheepdog to protect the weak and stand against evil. This teaching shaped Chris's entire life. Even as a child, he was the one who stood up to bullies and protected the smaller kids. Growing up in rural Texas, hunting was an integral part of his life. His father gave him his first rifle at age 8, a .38 6-caliber hunting rifle. Chris would practice with this rifle for hours, learning to hit targets. During his high school years, Chris became interested in rodeo. He did bronco riding and bull wrestling. This gave him courage, endurance, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. He also played on the baseball team, but his real passion was riding horses and the cowboy lifestyle. After graduating high school, Chris studied ranch management at Tarleton State University. His goal was to own a large ranch and continue the cowboy lifestyle. But fate had other plans. In 1996, a major turning point occurred in Chris's life. He had left university and was trying to pursue his dream of being a cowboy. But one day, a news report he watched on television changed his life: terrorist attacks on American military bases. In 1998, at age 24, Chris Kyle decided to enlist in the military. This decision surprised his family because Chris had never shown interest in military service before. But he said he felt a calling to serve his country. Initially, he considered joining the Marines, but after talking to a Navy recruiter, he decided to join the Navy SEALs. The SEALs were the U.S. Navy's elite special forces unit and required one of the world's toughest military training programs. BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, was a legendary training program in military history. During this 6-month training, 80% of candidates would drop out. The training was so tough that most candidates couldn't push past their physical and mental limits and would surrender. BUDS training was pure torture for Chris, but he showed the same resilience and never give up spirit he had learned in Texas. During Hell Week, the week where candidates could only sleep a total of a few hours, constantly tested with cold water, mud, and physical challenges, he stayed standing. During training, Chris's biggest advantage was his natural shooting ability from his ranch life. Instructors immediately noticed he had exceptional natural talent. Chris could consistently hit static targets up to 800 meters away. In 2001, Chris Kyle officially became a Navy SEAL, but the real test had not yet begun. After the September 11th attacks, America was at war. Chris Kyle and his SEAL team completed their preparations for the 2003 Iraq invasion. For Chris, this was the biggest test of his life, fighting against real enemies in a real war environment. During his first tour, Chris participated in operations in the city of Nasiriyah. He would never forget the first kill he made there. When an Iraqi woman tried to throw a grenade at American soldiers, Chris shot her. This incident deeply affected him, but it also made him understand what his mission was, to protect American soldiers' lives. Chris's ability quickly emerged during his first tour. He wasn't just a good marksman, he was a natural hunter on the battlefield. He could predict enemy movements, find perfect positions, and hit targets even in the most difficult conditions. When he completed his first tour, Chris had achieved 40 confirmed kills. This exceeded what most soldiers achieve in their entire careers. But for Chris, this was just the beginning. Chris's real fame was born during his second and third tours. In 2005-2006, he was stationed in the city of RAMADI. RAMADI was one of the most dangerous cities in the world at that time. Dozens of American soldiers were dying daily, and the city was effectively under insurgent control. Here, Chris perfected the art of sniping. He would climb onto the city's rooftops, sometimes wait in the same position for days, and observe enemy movements. His shots were so precise that insurgents gave him the name Al-Shaitan Ramadi, the Devil of Ramadi. Chris's method was simple but effective. Protect American patrols. He would watch over soldiers from rooftops as they patrolled the streets. When an insurgent tried to attack Americans, Chris would stop them. One of his most famous shots was made from a distance of 1,920 meters. This distance was one of the longest sniper shots made at that time. Chris had neutralized an enemy militant from this distance with a single shot. During his second tour in Ramadi, an $80,000 bounty was placed on Chris's head. This was the highest bounty placed on an American soldier. The insurgents wanted him so badly that they formed special assassination teams. Chris's tactic was to constantly change positions. He never fired from the same place twice. This approach kept him alive but also created even greater fear among the enemies. Chris Kyle was like a ghost in Ramadi, everywhere but nowhere to be caught. During this period, Chris's psychological state began to change. Each kill meant American lives saved, but it also accumulated a burden on his conscience. He spent nights writing detailed reports, analyzing each shot, and constantly pushing himself to be better. Chris's success in Iraq came at a cost: his family life. He had married Taya Renee Studebaker in 2002. Taya was a beautiful, intelligent woman who loved Chris deeply, but Chris's constant deployment strained their marriage. Their son Colton was born in 2005. Chris missed his son's birth because he was in Iraq. This was a huge disappointment for him. As a father, he wanted to be there for his son's birth, but he believed his duty was also important. Every time he returned home, Chris came back as a different person. Taya noticed that her husband was becoming increasingly withdrawn, no longer as relaxed and talkative as before. Chris was struggling with war memories, having nightmares at night. The biggest problem was that even when Chris was home, his mind was still in Iraq. He worried about his friends' safety, afraid something would happen to them when he wasn't there. This thought made him restless day and night. Taya noticed her husband was showing PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, symptoms, but Chris wouldn't admit it. He claimed he was strong and didn't experience such problems. This denial made the problems even worse. Their daughter McKenna was born in 2007. Chris missed this birth too because he was on his third tour. Taya was now exhausted. Her husband was physically returning home but was still spiritually at war. Chris's third tour, 2006-2007, became the peak of his career. During this period, he participated in operations in Sadr City and Ramadi. His sniping skills had reached legendary levels. Commanders wanted Chris for the most critical operations. During this tour, Chris made his longest distance shot, 2,100 meters. This shot was the longest distance shot recorded as a confirmed kill at that time. The insurgent at the target was preparing an RPG attack on an American convoy. During his third tour, Chris's tactics became even more advanced. He was now conducting not just reactive, but proactive operations. He could predict enemy plans and lure them into traps. But during this tour, Chris's psychological condition seriously deteriorated. When he returned home, he was now completely silent. He barely spoke to his family, constantly went out, and drank alcohol. His fourth and final tour, 2008-2009, was both the peak and the low point for Chris. During this tour, his total kill count reached 160. He had officially become America's deadliest sniper. But at the same time, this tour brought the war inside him to its peak. Chris could no longer sleep, constantly living on edge. He was restless even in Iraq because he was afraid of returning home. At home, he felt useless, thinking he had lost his purpose. In 2009, Chris Kyle ended his military career. But his real war was just about to begin. Chris's return to civilian life was much harder than he expected. After living for 10 years in an adrenaline-filled, high-tempo, life-and-death combat environment, the mundaneness of daily life was like torture to him. The first problem was a sense of purposelessness. In Iraq, Chris was saving American lives every day. This gave him a great sense of purpose. But in civilian life, he couldn't find this sense of purpose. He felt useless, like he was floating in a void. The second problem was constantly living on edge. Even when sitting in a restaurant, Chris would check exit doors and look for potential threats. Even grocery shopping required great effort because crowds made him very uncomfortable. The biggest problem was his inability to connect with his family. Chris couldn't share his war memories with his family because he wanted to protect them. But this approach only isolated him further. Taya clearly saw that her husband was depressed. Chris had difficulty getting out of bed in the mornings, stayed unmotivated throughout the day, and tried to sleep by drinking alcohol at night. In 2009, Chris founded Craft International, a company providing specialized training for military and law enforcement. This company became his new purpose. He thought he could save other soldiers' lives by passing on his experiences. Craft International's logo was crossed rifles over a skull, with the slogan, "Despite what your mama told you, violence does solve problems." This logo reflected Chris's war philosophy. The company grew rapidly. Chris's fame and experience attracted many clients. He provided training to SWAT teams, military units, and private security companies. But his success in business life didn't solve his personal problems. Chris was still experiencing PTSD symptoms and having difficulties in family life. In 2012, Chris published his autobiography, American Sniper, the autobiography of the most lethal sniper in U.S. military history. This book was the first time he detailed his war experiences. The book was like emotional therapy for Chris. He felt somewhat relieved by writing about his experiences. In the book, he described the realities of war very strikingly, how difficult it was, how painful, but also how necessary. American Sniper became a great success. It stayed on the New York Times bestseller list for a long time. Chris began giving speeches across the country for book promotions. During this period, positive changes occurred in Chris's life. The process of writing the book and giving speeches gave him the opportunity to process what he had experienced. He began to cope with his traumas in a healthier way. One of the most meaningful periods in Chris's life was when he began helping other veterans. He developed various programs to support veterans struggling with PTSD. One of his most important projects was taking war veterans hunting and shooting sports. Chris believed that being in contact with nature and using weapons in a safe environment helped veterans heal. Within these programs, Chris spent time with dozens of veterans every week. He talked with them, shared his experiences, and gave them morale. This work gave Chris great satisfaction because he was again fulfilling his purpose of protecting people. Chris's approach during this period was very empathetic. He knew the difficulties veterans experienced from his own experiences and treated them supportively, not judgmentally. February 2nd, 2013 was the last day of Chris Kyle's life. That day he was going to a shooting range called Rough Creek Lodge to help two veterans. One of these veterans was Eddie Ray Routh. Eddie Routh was a 25-year-old Marine veteran. He had served in Iraq and was experiencing serious PTSD problems. Routh's mother had asked Chris to help her son. That morning, Chris had told Taya he was a bit worried about this trip. He had texted Taya, "This kid is weird." But he still chose to go because he didn't want to miss an opportunity to help a veteran. Chris, along with his close friend Chad Littlefield, picked up Eddie Routh and went to Rough Creek Lodge. The plan was to shoot together and help Eddie relax. However, something unexpected happened at the shooting range. Eddie Routh shot Chris Kyle and Chad Littlefield from behind without any warning. Chris was killed at age 38 in his own country by someone he was trying to help. Eddie Routh later stole Chris's pickup truck and fled, but was caught shortly after. He was making nonsensical statements like "they were trying to kill me." Chris Kyle's death shocked America. A hero who had made the greatest sacrifices for his country had been killed by someone he was trying to help. This incident showed how deep the invisible wounds of war were. Chris's funeral was held at Cowboy Stadium and thousands attended. As the funeral convoy moved along Texas highways, thousands of people stood in respect. But Chris's death wasn't just the loss of a hero. It created great awareness about PTSD in America. People better understood that war causes not only physical, but also psychological wounds. The details that emerged during Eddie Routh's trial showed how serious a problem PTSD was. Routh had lost his perception of reality due to war trauma. After Chris Kyle's death, his legacy continued to live on in various ways. The American Sniper film was directed by Clint Eastwood and starred Bradley Cooper as Chris. The film was a great success and brought Chris's story to millions of people. The Chris Kyle Frog Foundation, established in his name, continued to help war veterans and their families. This foundation continued the veteran assistance programs Chris had started. Kraft International continued its activities after Chris's death. The company had gained an important place in military and law enforcement training. But perhaps Chris's most important legacy was the increased awareness about PTSD. His story helped society better understand the difficulties war veterans experience. Chris Kyle's story shows the complexity of modern heroism. He was a true hero. He saved thousands of American lives, made the greatest sacrifices for his country. But at the same time, he was an imperfect human being carrying the wounds of war. Chris's life shows that war continues not only on the battlefield, but also at home. He was physically invincible in Iraq, but couldn't win the war in his own mind. His story also reveals how serious a problem PTSD is. Even a strong, determined person like Chris couldn't withstand the effects of this disease. But the most important message of Chris Kyle's story is the value of sacrifice. He sacrificed everything to protect others, his life, his mental health, his family happiness. He gave it all for his country and his brothers in arms. Chris Kyle went down in history with 160 confirmed kills as America's deadliest sniper. But he was also a hero who saved thousands of lives, protected countless families, and served his country with infinite loyalty. His story shows that heroism is not simple. Real heroes are not perfect. They are ordinary people who show extraordinary courage in the face of extraordinary circumstances. And Chris Kyle's story reminds us that freedom has a price. This price is paid by people like Chris with their own lives. Thanks to their sacrifice, we can continue our safe lives. Chris Kyle was a legend. But he was also a human being with flaws, fears, and struggles. And perhaps this is what makes him a true hero. His story is both inspiring and cautionary. Inspiring because it shows what great sacrifices a person can make. Cautionary because it reveals the true cost of war. Chris Kyle's legacy continues to live on after his death. He was a hero who served his country during America's most difficult times, showed what sacrifice means, and ultimately paid the price for that sacrifice. Today, Chris Kyle's story is not just a soldier's story, but also the story of modern America. What he experienced reflects the trauma the country experienced after war, the difficulties veterans face, and the real cost of heroism. Chris Kyle went down in history with 160 confirmed kills, but his real legacy cannot be measured in numbers. He represents the purest form of protective instinct, the sheepdog protecting the sheep from wolves. And perhaps the most powerful message of Chris Kyle's story is this: real heroes don't have superpowers. They are human beings like us. They just show extraordinary courage under extraordinary circumstances, and sometimes this courage cost them dearly. But Chris Kyle's sacrifice was not in vain. His story inspires thousands of people, provides funding for veteran assistance programs, and ensures that America approaches its war veterans with more empathy. Chris Kyle, America's deadliest sniper, a hero, a husband, a father, and most importantly, a patriot who sacrificed everything for his country. His story reminds us of the cost of freedom and the courage of those who pay that cost. And that's why Chris Kyle's story deserves to be remembered not just in the past, but today and in the future. Because thanks to people like him, we can live in peace. This is the real story of America's deadliest sniper, the story of a legend, a hero, and most importantly, a human being.